In some ways, it's the most clear example of where construction has an arbitrage opportunity. Like if you're in the that beginning stage of creating an estimate, whether it's like a design build where you're going back and forth with the owner, or whether it's a hard bid situation where someone has said, these are the plans, this is what it's going to be, and keeps issuing addenda to that, and you trying to keep up with that addenda and keep up with that price up until the day that you have to submit the bid, the hour, the minute that you have to submit the bid. There are opportunities for AI in all of that to win because you're utilizing a tool that gives you an information advantage.
Have you ever wondered how successful architecture, engineering, and construction companies scale their business?
Or have you ever wanted guidance on how to get more growth, wealth, and freedom from your AEC company?
Well, then you're in luck. Hi, I'm Will Forat.
And I'm Justin Nagel, and we're your podcast hosts.
We interview successful AEC business leaders to learn how they use people, process, and technology to scale their businesses.
So sit back and get ready to learn from the industry's best. This is Building Scale.
Hey listeners, it's Will here. Our mission is to help the AEC industry protect itself by making technology easy. If you've ever listened to our show, then you know that the three pillars of scaling a business are people, process, and technology. So if you suspect technology is your weak link, then book a call with us to see where we can help maximize your company's IT and cybersecurity strategy. Just go to buildingscale.net/help.
Today's guest is Dr. Adam Krob. Dr. Krob is a seasoned executive with over 20 years of experience at the intersection of technology and business strategy. He currently serves as the IT director for Bow Brothers Construction, a large, heavy civil contractor based in New Orleans, Louisiana, NOLA, as they say when you live there. I don't think I get to say that yet, though.
You can if you want.
Oh,
People will
alrighty.
question you, but that's okay.
His focus lies in applying emerging technologies like AI, machine learning, spot solutions, and streamlining construction operations. Adam has led major process improvements in trade partner billing, material management, and operational cycle time reduction. He champions data-driven decision-making, achieving significant ROI through strategic technology pilot programs. Known for his hands-on, proactive leadership style, he is reshaping how construction companies approach tech and innovation. And Adam is passionate about turning complex business problems into sustainable tech-enabled solutions that drive real value. And with all that said, Adam, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Justin. Thanks, Will. Happy to be here. I have to say that it sounds like AI wrote that, but it really didn't.
It's just what happens when you're in the AI world so long. You just start sounding like computers. Oh, is that how they get you? We're going to go pretty deep in technology here, but is that how they get you? Is this how the beginning of Terminator starts? You start writing
then
like
we all
AI.
start sounding like Arnold Schwarzenegger. So that it'll be a really
If
great
I could
day.
look like him back in the day, I might trade that for it. So that's just something to think about. Okay, so before we get completely off track, tell us a little bit about you. How did you get into the construction space? And then tell us about Bow Bros.
So my father was a general contractor from the time I was little. And so I worked on construction sites, obviously, like many of us in the summer times to make a little bit of extra money. I did all of the things that were exciting to do, but really started in technology in the mid 80s and had fun with Novell to Windows networking to Unix, Linux. Still sad that Solaris is gone, but really got into construction about almost 10 years ago now, 9 years, and 9 years next week. And that I had been in the ed tech space and was working in universities and working for startups, and really found construction to be an interesting place to land because in a lot of ways it has opportunities that many of us don't see in other industries. There's a famous Deloitte article that says that construction is the second worst industry at adopting technology, only beaten out by non-farm agriculture, and that means hunting. So only the hunters use technology less than we do, and I'm not sure about that sometimes.
I read this book where this guy went to Alaska to hunt a buffalo or bison. American buffalo. And they don't let them use a lot of technology, but the small amounts that they can use, real high-end, sat phones and
Yes.
night vision goggles and like those things. I don't necessarily always chalk up those types of technologies to what a business uses, perhaps, is my opinion. Before we go deep into the tech side, tell us about the company, though. What are we looking at size-wise, things like that, so listeners have a good understanding of what you're doing and what you're implementing.
So we're what we call a solidly middle market company. We do about $500 million a year pretty consistently. We're more than 100 years old and coming up on the fourth generation of family ownership. And so we do a lot of different things. We have about 700 full-time employees. About 400 or so of those are what we call technology users. We have a lot of people who are crane operators and carpenters and, are actually doing a lot of that work, construction concrete finishers. So we do a variety of things. We do a lot of work on the Mississippi River and on the Gulf of Mexico because we're here. So a lot of marine work, but we also do some really cool projects in sort of more of a traditional general contractor space. And that's fun. Like, doing a renovation on the Louisiana Superdome. That's really cool stuff right before the latest Super Bowl.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's super cool.
Yes.
So, that's just on what the company does. Now, why were you brought in?
So I was brought in about 9 years ago because the original organization was led by an accountant who had no IT background. And they really wanted to establish like a formal IT organization. And that's pretty true of a lot of construction companies at the time, is that they had sort of grown up more organically and they didn't have a professional IT organization. So I came in, and the first thing that I did is I said, how many problems do we have? What are those problems? How can we identify those problems? So it sort of started with tracking, obviously, which is one of the key things that we've got to do, put a CRM system in place so that we're actually tracking tickets, but also identified what are the areas that were holding us back. And we called those our four boat anchors. And those were legacy systems that were keeping us from moving forward as an organization. So one of my things that I would provide my boss, who's the president of the company, every week was, where are we at with the boat anchors? And they were, old imaging systems. They were an AS400 that was still glowing brightly. They were all sorts of things like that were keeping us from putting our resources into spaces where we really need to put our resources.
Can I ask why, why keep these legacy systems around? I mean, that's old. Like even 10 years ago, those systems were already old.
Yes.
So why weren't they like decommissioned, to move on to new technology even back then?
So part of it was we had not really taken on sort of our data governance journey or started our data governance journey. We had one memo that was several years old from a former general counsel about how long we might want to keep some of this information. And the result was that we didn't really have a sense, and people in their own areas had different ideas of how long they needed to keep their data. So someone in one area would violently react whenever I said I'm turning off the old imaging system from 12 years ago because we really ought not to have that data. And so the result was, in some ways, one of the things that helped us move forward was establishing a really good data governance group. And it's certainly an evolving process, and getting closer to a more consistent approach has taken us years and years, but now we have a consistent approach. We know how long we're supposed to keep data, and it makes it much easier to say, no, you may not have that anymore, because it's a risk to the organization to keep that.
Can I pause you there for a second?
Sure.
Okay. For construction leaders out there that may have never heard the word governance, IT governance, or data governance, can you explain to someone that really doesn't know what this is, what that actually is and what that means, and why have it?
So, I mean, in my mind, data governance is all about, who has access to what and for how long, and what are the drivers of that. of those decisions from like both a risk perspective as well as like a profitability and analytics perspective. And that's been an interesting journey too, like not to go off on a tangent, but one of the things that we've had pitch battles about is how long do we keep geotech reports that are, 50 years old, because probably we live in Louisiana, the land slips around a bit and it's probably not valid anymore. So we probably don't, that 50-year-old geotech report is probably something we would need to redo anyway. But the people who had the geotech reports in their closets still held on to them until they retired. And so some of those battles we were just like, we don't want to fight. And I think that the what really helped us understand it was getting our general counsel involved. Our general counsel really helped drive people's understanding of the risk of having and having available that information, but also the overhead of having that. Not only the technology overhead, but also every time we had a subpoena, it would take quite some time to gather the records properly. There's an old saying that the last phase of construction is litigation. And so there is not an insubstantial number of times where you get a subpoena and then you have to identify those records. And part of my role in information governance has been pushing us to a single platform where we can have all of that information and then manage it much more easily and much more rationally and saying, okay, it's our 10+1, time to go. Press the delete button, please, and would just move forward. So I feel like we had really this nice sort of coming together of the general counsel who was very concerned about litigation and me who was very concerned about getting rid of these systems. And we were able to work together and really get past them. Took a couple of years, but we got past them. And so the result is now we have, modern architecture that I'm relatively happy with.
So real quick, just to summarize. So data governance is to reduce risks around litigation because keeping data too long can actually be used against you, right? Would that be correct? Okay. As well as keeping that data, it's stale. You then have to, even if you're part of litigation, but it's not necessarily you specifically, but you're called on.
Yes.
It's time and resources that you have to spend sifting through that data. And and essentially the longer you have, the more data you have to sift through. So if you go with essentially the minimum, so 10+1, as you call it, so 10 years, right? That's pretty standard. Then you know what you should be deleting, and you could even create policies, not just, written policies, but then also digital policies that automate the process.
That's correct.
Okay. Is there any other reasons? Because you talked about risks. Were there any other risks besides litigation?
Well, I mean, I think there were access risks. There are security risks certainly as well. I mean, one of the things that we talk a lot about at data governance and is consistent reviews of access privileges and what is stored where and what ought to be stored where. One of the pitched battles that we fought was over our shared sort of Active Directory drives, that they became this absolute morass. And we had people who were storing relatively confidential information on there that was discoverable. One person had his bonus sheet where you fill out everybody's salary and how much bonus they're going to get, and we found that and said, no, you really ought not to be keeping that on the shared drive. One person had all of his pictures from Disney World from many, many years stored on the shared drive. And the result was that we had to come up with a real policy of what belongs on the shared drive and what belongs where. This is a
Disney
constant
Pictures
battle.
isn't part of the game plan for the company. That's it's weird. I thought that would have been.
So listeners, keep in mind this specific story because this is super relevant to AI. We will have an AI conversation in a little bit, and this is very, very, very relevant and a very real problem that you need to then consider. So listen to this story.
Yes, because yes, and we will talk about that in a minute. I know where you're going, well, but it is really interesting to think about how people treated it as sort of a dumping ground. Or somebody said, "Oh, I'm getting a new computer. I'm going to copy all of my files onto the shared drive, and I'll just grab it back when I'm done." And rather than copy and cut and paste, they did copy paste, and you know what you get. You get every single one of their private documents forever. And it's also interesting, like one of the things that kind of shocked me, and maybe it's because I came in when I did, is how few people had email addresses that were not their corporate email. And the number of things that they're subscribed to that are not corporate kinds of things that they should be subscribed to. Um, it's fascinating to see as we move forward and say, look, you absolutely cannot have your corporate email address be your only email address. You need to have a personal email address, and you need to have your Walmart shopping on your personal email address and not on your corporate email address. And I don't care that you leave the company and your multi-factor authentication is through your corporate email address for your Target, red card or whatever it is. And that happens actually a surprising amount.
So you talked about obviously the litigation when you talk about legacy software governance. Hey, like that to me seems like the easy explanation to leadership saying like, hey, we gotta evolve, like we gotta
Yes.
move forward. What are other reasons why, hey, like getting your tech right, getting your infrastructure right, getting the stack that you're using right to your company has massive implications across the entire company. But I feel like it's very difficult, specifically in the construction space, for leaders that are not technical to necessarily see that. How did you explain some of these, or how did you get them to buy into the concept of like, hey, like we need to make our tech better because that will make our company more scalable and make our company better across the board?
So for me, it happened with specific alliances with specific people that are great drivers of change in the organization. One of the best drivers of change in construction industry is safety. It sounds ironic because the safety has the reputation of being kind of behind, but our safety team has been very technology forward. They were some of our first adopters of Power BI. They were some of our first adopters of Procore, which is our construction management software. And by utilizing them, that is like the biggest stick. It's not always a great carrot, but it's a really good stick. And every construction company that I know of has safety as number one. It's the number one priority, which makes sense. Our intention is to get everyone home okay every single day. And if that's the intention and that's the baseline, then everything driven with a safety requirement gets extra attention. So, safety and quality helped us drive also our digitization of plans. So when I started, we were still running plans out to job sites that were printed. We in fact had plan bins that have since been removed from all of our offices where you would have the plans for the day would get shot out. But the real life challenges really helped show that. We had a situation where we were pouring concrete for a precast member that we were going to be taking out to a job. We poured it in our yard. Someone was using the previous measurements from the previous shop drawings, and the result was we had to repour all of that concrete. And that kind of thing is really, those stories really help show how important that is. And an odd one that is actually an area that I'm kind of excited about.
Sure.
Supply chain I think is really huge and super important for us, and demonstrating like provenance of materials and demonstrating quality of materials as part of the supply chain. Our safety senior VP tells a story that we were one of the contractors who worked on one of the flood walls that collapsed during Hurricane Katrina, which is, like one of the defining moments in the lives of everyone who lived in New Orleans. And there were lots of news reports that the sheet piles, the vertical pilings that we'd put in, were not to spec, and that we didn't put the sheet piles in properly. Well, we had the delivery ticket that was signed with the measurement. And so he stood there and watched and got out the measuring tape and knew what the results were ahead of time, that we were actually beyond spec, and that we had provided materials that were actually beyond what was required. And the result was that, all of that went away, and we were all like, okay, now let's get back to business. Let's get back to work. And in this era where we're talking more and more about compliance, and particularly with, there are the Buy America and Buy American requirements, and we have to show provenance of critical materials for us, a lot of which is steel, but even things like aggregate and sand, we have to know what that provenance is, and we have to be able to track that. That is an area that I'm very interested in. We don't have really great solutions that are holistic yet in construction, but we're moving in that right direction.
Okay. So you have a whole bunch of data.
Yes,
You have been moving, you've moved the company towards governance architecture. And this is partially because of litigation, partially also just for your own sanity. But there's a third part, which a lot of people don't necessarily talk about unless they start their AI journey and then realize how far they are behind. You actually helped fast forward Bobros so that you could start your journey way earlier towards AI, right? And so can you talk about first, how are you, why AI, and then how did the conversation first start about? And then what are the steps that you needed to take to eventually get there, and then we'll talk some more after that.
Sure. So let me start with the beginning of our journey, which is around 2019. Felt very strongly that we needed to be engaged in machine learning, and we needed to understand what it can do for our company. And so I brought in someone to look at our financial data and run it against some models that were trained only on our data. At the time were relative in today's world, were relatively unsophisticated, sort of random tree models, where we were trying to figure out, okay, what is it that will show us that we're really going to have a profitable job here or not? And what we found is that even with 10 years of data for about 100 jobs a year, it wasn't nearly enough. It was just not enough to really understand and to be predictive more than a coin flip. And the result was, we said, okay, look, it's not that it's not there, but it's not now. And so we continued to look at it and continue to investigate. And about a year and a half ago, we said, the world has changed. Like, the emergence of large language models as a consumer thing became something that was relevant to us. We started to see what I think somebody calls it shadow IT utilization. And I saw something something still said that like 70% of people don't tell that their boss that they're using an LLM at work, even though they are, which is a little bit scary. And that's, come on, guys, risk,
Yeah.
governance risk. That scares the crap out of me. I'd rather know about it. And so we first crafted a policy, and we said, we've got to have guardrails. We have to have, this is what you can do. We have a specific policy that outlines, we don't outline the specific models, but we outline what models need to do. And if you have any questions at all, you should talk to me. And the result is that we've had a lot of really good conversations about that. And then from that emerged an AI steering committee, not an IT steering committee, but an AI steering committee, where we are actively talking about what direction do we need to go. And we've made real substantial progress in thinking about and understanding where AI fits and where it does not yet. I think the question is yet. And particularly, one of the things that, I know Will is going to talk a little bit about, training data, but I also want to talk about one of the things that concerns us pretty substantially is the degree to which we find the AI, the LLM results trustworthy or not. In a safety sensitive industry, 97% just ain't good enough. Like we cannot have models that are suggesting activities where we only feel 97% safe. It's not sufficient. And the result is that we've specifically started in areas around project management where it's much more around the financials, where we do have a little bit more of a sense that, we can interpret and it's not going to cause a crane to crash into a building. But we've also been working in specific areas to look for the spots where it's appropriate. And the other thing that we did, and we've done this, there are sort of two different divisions in my company that do very different things. One is the sort of civil construction, utilities and roads and bridges and pile driving, and the other is this vertical construction. And they're very different in terms of what they do and what they accomplish. And so I think one of the things that's been helpful is focusing on each one of the areas and saying, that's going to be different, and getting together a group of people who are in the weeds and are applying AI to what they do every day. We call these AI innovators, and we meet once a month and we talk about what it is that we're doing. And then I meet with my AI steering committee every other week to talk higher level, to talk about platform, which I'm still not 100% sure of, and directions forward. And that's ever evolving. I listened to a podcast this morning about an article about the single founder company where he's training AI copies of himself to do all of the work, which seems wacky in some ways, but also has some interesting potential. I don't know. So, and the result has been really positive. We have things that are like AI that are built into tools. There are tools that are well documented and using very well proven models around schedule, around this project called Takeoff, where there's a process where we basically have to measure all of the interior space of a building to see how much paint we need to use, for example. And that tends to be a very laborious task and done by very expensive people. And there are opportunities for us to get real value out of that, not just for us as a company, but for our owners as well. And this is where I think as construction companies, we have to expand our understanding of value, because the value that we're going to drive is going to have potential implications, not just for us, but for our subcontractors and for our owners. And in the case of this is where this Takeoff example is really interesting, I think, is that for owners, if you had the opportunity to do a what if analysis very quickly of moving a wall, for example, it moves 2 feet this way or 2 feet this way. If I can move it 2 feet this way and save you 2 weeks potentially because of structural things that I don't have to do, that might be hundreds of thousands of dollars in carrying costs of your construction line. And all of a sudden, I can make a better decision, better informed decision, because I have the speed and velocity that's provided to me only through AI. And I'm still getting it through the lens of that really smart person who's doing the final review and saying, okay, by the way, I think it can save you, 2 weeks on schedule.
Okay. There's a lot here to take in. There was a lot.
Sorry.
It's okay. It's okay. So I want to break this down for the listeners for a bit. So for Takeoff, that's done by estimators, right? And estimators are super expensive. Why? They require a lot of experience, or they require a lot of oversight.
And there are not a lot of them.
And yeah, exactly. Not a lot of them out there that have the experience to be able to do that correctly. Because if you get the estimation wrong, everything goes downhill from there, right? And if you get the estimation wrong, sort of the other way, then you don't win the job either.
Right, exactly. You got to hit the sweet spot.
Yep. So your margins really start from there. Okay. So you're able to shorten the amount of time that it takes to estimate. Just for that one example, the painting side, right? Which is a very simple example, but I think a lot of people can understand. How long would it normally take, right? So give a normal estimation of time, how long that process would take. Now have someone, and AI isn't doing all of this. It's AI assisted, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Just to be clear. So AI is then assisting. So can you give the example of how long it takes a normal? How many people and how long does it take normally? And then AI assisted.
So for, a building that might be 3 or 4 stories tall, if we did the whole thing, it would probably take a couple of days for a smart estimator to do it. But with the AI assist, it goes to hours.
Wow.
That is the kind of change that I think could really leverage some, incredible opportunities for us to deliver different kinds of value.
And that's just one piece of the estimation, right? That's just painting. That's not even
you
right.
draw it all, and then it gives you the volumetrics, and it gives you all the different types of things. So it's going to tell you that about how much drywall as well.
Right.
But if you think about that and you think, okay, well, I need to make the change. Oftentimes, like, you're going back to the model and you're like, okay, so I've got to move this and got to move this, got to divide dependencies here and there. If you get the AI assist to do it, it's so much faster. Like, the teams that do it, they're like, well, like, this is really an incredible leap.
So that was super great example. And then
Wait, before you go, Will, also pointing out the labor shortage of estimator. Now, when you cut days to hours, that one estimator now has
Can
more
do.
power to hit multiple sites, multiple jobs, multiple things that before you'd have to hire. You'd have to find another person or have to wait and delay. So, everybody talks about how labor shortage is so crucial in the construction space. And this is an example how AI can aid in that. How do we find more help when it comes to
And in
labor?
some ways, it's the most clear example of where construction has an arbitrage opportunity. Like, if you're in that beginning stage of creating an estimate, whether it's like a design build where you're going back and forth with the owner, or whether it's a hard bid situation where someone has said, these are the plans, this is what it's going to be, and keeps issuing addenda to that, and you trying to keep up with that addenda and keep up with that price up until the day that you have to submit the bid, the hour, the minute that you have to submit the bid. There are opportunities for AI in all of that to win, because you're utilizing a tool that gives you an information advantage.
time is really what we're talking about. It's a speed advantage. It's not necessarily that it's doing it on its own.
No, it is not. Correct.
So sort of what we call the what if analysis. So let's say when a change order comes in, right, happens, you said something about the construction loan. Can you connect the dots there between the construction loan and the change order and how AI helps that?
So the dots that connect there are that when you're doing a change order, you often have opportunities to do it in one way or another. In the initial phase, there's this value engineering process where you basically have, this is what I really want to build, and then you get back to, this is what I really can afford to build. So the value engineering conversation is a long conversation at the very beginning, but you can imagine that in a change order situation, that value engineering conversation is sort of forestalled because of the speed at which you need to respond to the change. Sometimes that speed is because it's a critical path item and you have to get to it immediately. But if you could have the opportunity to do a what if analysis during a change order conversation with an owner, then you could conceivably drive a shortened duration to either removing a delay or actually shortening a project. And I think that there are opportunities for us to think about how we utilize that data, and then the owner is saying, okay, I can close earlier. I can, either have that construction loan, if I'm financing it through a sort of a construction loan process, or if I'm a hotel and I can open 2 weeks earlier and I can fill rooms 2 weeks earlier, I get revenue faster. So, I mean, it's both of those sides of the coin. One of the things that's not specifically AI, but is technology related, is a lean scheduling technique called TACT. That's this waterfalling technique where you bring in different people. It's very, very much, Japanese management style, but we have some technologies tools that support that. And it's incredible the degree to which you can have this flow of the construction process and flow of information with just really simple tools. They don't have to be complicated. They don't have to be super expensive, but they get that process moving and moving more effectively. Um, and also reducing the time it takes to use those kinds of tools. That tax schedule, getting that from a traditional schedule that says, these are all of the different milestones, these are all of the different activities. A lot of those schedules are hundreds of pages long when you do a multi-year project. And saying, okay, what's the next 30-day look ahead for my subcontractor? You know what? An LLM can review that and can do the first cut at what that look ahead is supposed to be like, and we can feed that into the tax schedule. That's pretty cool.
So we talked about all this work. Why don't we talk for a quick second? Because work on the AI side is represented by a value.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about that? How does that translate? And then why is that important?
See, I think this is where we're all trying to zero in, is what's a meaningful impact for AI in the construction industry. I think that, there's a really good sense of, what's the value of AI labor, and thinking about it rather than as a tool, thinking about it as a unit of labor. That's a really great way for us to think about it and then translate it into value. So, effectively it's, what value is produced times some sort of, some sort of risk, reduction. So, like we're not getting all the value, we're getting some of the value over the amount of money that it costs to basically buy the token plus, have a human being figure out what the heck the AI is talking about.
And what is the token?
The token is that particular AI process, whether it is a conversation with a large language model, or whether it's an activity that's created by an AI agent. It's what's that sort of unit that we're basically paying for from one of the providers. And one of my gripes right now is that all of these tokens being used by companies that are not really delivering a lot of value with them. But that's a whole nother story, and I want to get down that rabbit hole. But one of the things that we've looked at is we need to have it be a meaningful amount of change. And like, I think the best example where we've really found value that translates and people understand it is probably one of the least complicated implementations of AI, which is AI transcriptions of meetings. And I think that this is probably where people get the aha moment more quickly than spending time typing into ChatGPT what they should get their wife for her birthday, or not. What we found is we have different categories of value that it delivers. And one of the biggest values that we found that we had people who were just in meetings to take notes. So we had a note taker who was allocated just to take notes. So that note taker could do one of two other things. One, if it's an APM who's just assistant project manager, who's just sitting in on this meeting because they need to learn how this goes, then that's great. But if we have, then they can not only sit in on the meeting, but they can actually contribute to the meeting. And that's a value in and of itself. Or if it's an assistant project manager, or maybe it's even like a field engineer who wouldn't necessarily sit in on this meeting, we can have them do something else. We can have them do another, whole set of jobs, whether that's, an additional safety inspection, whether that's an additional, meeting with a subcontractor, or perhaps even just doing a remeasure of a concrete pour before we get it done so that we can get a better placement of our embeds when we put the walls up. Those kinds of things are really substantially higher value. I think that substantial higher value makes a, huge difference. And that, when we start talking about people delivering value for the organization, as humans, they need to deliver that value in a very direct way. And let me put it this different way. they need to deliver that value in a way that is meaningful in chunks of time. Because like one of the things that will drive you insane is talking to a software vendor who says, I can save you 5 minutes a day. Are you going to use that 5 minutes a day to like write the next great novel or, implement some sort of crazy new idea on a job? You are not. You're going to talk about what the score was in the Saints game last night, or whether they're going to start this person at quarterback or that person at quarterback, because we have no idea who's going to start a quarterback for the Saints this year. No idea whatsoever.
You should ask ChatGPT what it thinks. Maybe they have a better insight.
I think they have a better shot at predicting that than the water cooler does. But I do feel like we have to measure this in some sort of meaningful numbers. I apologize, my watch rang on me.
All good, no worries.
It's one of the stupid things about having these, we're multi-connected. I think that's one of the best explanations of how we can start uncovering that value. But we have to think also more broadly than just our organization, which is why I think the takeoff example is really very helpful. As we start talking about our organizations, we need to get beyond seeing the value that we deliver in a very limited way. We need to think about the ecosystem, and as technologists, we need to talk about the value that we're delivering beyond just our organization. So I think it's really easy to start talking about it from the perspective of us individually, but we need to be able to say, okay, how does this help our subcontractors? How does this help our owners? How does this help our architects or designers to do a better job and to deliver a better product? Is, one of the things that's really wonderful about working for an organization like the one I'm in is that we build things that are really important and that are really important to be built right. We're building roads, we're building bridges, we're building things that we have to do in the right way. I think it's very important for us to think about holistically how we are benefiting the community and think about, okay, how can we utilize our technology to drive that community contribution in a better way?
I assume that's probably a piece of the platform, right? Like you're not
Yes.
solidified on the platform. So obviously I'm not going to ask, well, what are you going with? Because you don't know. However, you've obviously done some discovery there, right? So
Yes.
what are some of the variables that go through this? I actually noticed this the other day as we take our AI journey, and I historically have used Chat, but then ChatGPT, but then also Copilot, Gemini in there. Seeing the differences, if you ask the same question to each of them, is different, which is very intriguing to me, because I thought, oh, well, it's going to be a similar concept. But Copilot seems to be more cautious at giving you creative ideas, as in they try to be more, and I don't know, maybe you can talk to this. They seem to be more accurate, or try to be more accurate, or it won't feed you just an idea, where ChatGPT is just going to give you, hey, well, if you just wrote a unicorn into work, like the Saints will probably win the Super Bowl, right? Like that seems like a
Which is
thing
probably
that you
true.
That's a thing that you would hear there. And Copilot would be like, I don't know what to do with that. What do you mean? I'm just going to ask you the question back because this doesn't make any sense to me. So when you're going through these platforms, what are the differences that you've seen that you say, well, here is a perk. Here's something that we're not interested in, and kind of going through the steps.
So first off, I agree with you about Copilot. I think it's much more conservative. I think whoever is engineering the sort of the hidden prompt behind all of your chats
The
with
man behind the curtain.
Yeah, it's really an important thing, and we saw that last week where OpenAI released their new changes, and the hidden prompt was much too agreeable. It was telling everybody that their ideas were really great ideas when maybe they weren't.
It was just trying to stimulate business in the country.
It was
That's all
doing
it is. Hey, if
something
everybody has a great idea, everybody becomes an entrepreneur.
which, just as a quick aside, is scary as heck to me because, is AI's value in my mind, at least one of the high points of AI for me is perspectives. Like, I really feel like AI drives different perspectives for me, and those perspectives should not all be ones that agree with me. If I wanted to something agreeable, I would get into my social media feed somewhere deep and like relish in all the people saying that I've got the same opinions that they do, or I'd go to Reddit and just have all of my feelings stomped on for many, many hours. I feel like ChatGPT, the people who are on my um, AI innovators group, they love ChatGPT. They love the interface. They love the speed. They love the options that they have. They really liked it. We do not love ChatGPT teams. It is very difficult and complicated. Sharing is really not as easy as it should be. Everything is not easy. I'm very curious. I have not used Claude a lot, but the more I get into thinking about this as a coding, exercise, like really developing code for some of the Python scripts that I'm trying to utilize in the background. Claude's really good at that. And, it's really surprising to me. And I need to spend more time on Claude for sure. But I also think that, we're looking at providers that are giving us options for different models and then suggesting which models work right for which kind of situations. That's sort of next level. But there are emerging platforms where you're basically paying by token, you're paying by time that you're addressing the LLM. And that's where I think we're going to find some real opportunities for us as we scale to the entire organization, because the all you can eat price that is being established by, OpenAI or by Microsoft or by, any number of these different providers, it's too high for most people. I mean, they're definitely making lots of money off of my daughter who's a college student and uses AI, but not frequently. And I pay for her ChatGPT Pro license because I think she needs to be using it. But I also think we need to be able to have tools where we can have an all-you-can-eat price for our people who are really using the crap out of it. And again, I don't really care whether, XYZ company that came to me this last week and said, I've got an AI in my interface now. You can search everything. No, I don't need that. I don't want it. Stop it. You're just driving up the price of tokens. Stop it. I'm not happy with you right now. Like that, I actually have thought about writing on LinkedIn this week, like how unhappy I am about software companies that are just AI washing and, throwing up AI as, oh, we all have to be using AI, when in fact we really don't. Like if your product is not core AI, maybe you don't need it.
That's
If you
very
write that
interesting.
post, let me know. We'll put it in the show notes.
I will 100% write it this week because I'm so not happy with this, Justin.
Okay, so there was a lot to take in there.
Again, well, I tend to be verbose.
Oh yeah, no,
It's
love it.
thorough. I love
It's
it.
very thorough.
I
right?
love it.
There's a lot of thought behind what you're saying. Some people are not as far in their AI journey. You've given, I think, a lot of people a lot to talk about. Before I pivot, let's do a little bit of the connection between governance and AI and the problems of if you don't have governance and structure in place, what happens if you connect AI into that? Because AI needs data, right?
Yeah,
You
it
have the
doesn't
large
need data.
language models, so
Yeah.
you can sort of with large language models, there's a whole bunch of them, right? ChatGPT is one of them, Copilot, which is really ChatGPT on the back end. And then there's also Gemini, Claude. I mean, there's DeepMind, whatever it is, right? There's a whole bunch of them. However, you're going to get generic prompts because the data is, as it suggests, large language, right? So it's generic in the sense that it is not specific to your company. What AI, for it to be super valuable, you need to be able to ingest the data that is specific to your company to then start becoming sort of, to give it context. That's the piece that it's
Correct.
missing,
Yes.
is the context of specifically your company to be able to do the things that would be valuable in sort of interacting or interfacing with that AI agent. Okay. So can you talk about governance and specific when you introduce your company data to it? Why is that so important? And can you give some specific examples, even to the ones from before?
So the way that LLMs are created is that they have this initial training data, which is the big expensive part. They train on basically everything that they can find in the internet, and many things they probably shouldn't be training on, and lots of conversations about copyright in that regard. But as we all know, that most of the data that's held in the world is behind corporate structures, behind firewalls, in, repositories like shared drives on Active Directory servers, in SharePoint, in, things like that, data repositories there. And these large language models don't see any of that, so they don't know, they're not particularly good at it. Well, you're absolutely right. For it to get better and provide you with better specific context, you need to feed it. If you feed it in a way using one of these commercial tools that it's just out there for everybody to, or even more like end user kinds of tools, not even commercial, ChatGPT says, oh, well, that's great training data. I can train myself to get better about that. Well, here's my bid sheet for this particular bid, and here was my margin that I got on that. And by the way, that's now available to everybody.
Wait, so I'm just going to pause. So I'm going to pause
Everybody.
there. So if you're using one of the personal based models, I love this quote. I don't remember who said it first, but I do like using it, which is, if the product or service is free, you are the product.
The consumer. Yeah, you are the product. Yes, that's correct. Yes.
So essentially, by interacting with one of these large language models, if it's free or if it's a personal version, it is training off of you and your data. So if you, like you just said, bid sheet with margin in there. And there are many examples in big companies, like I think Sony or Samsung did this kind of recently, and then their competitors were able to look up essentially some of the competitive engineering and some of the competitive pricing that was out there. Other competitors were able to look that stuff up. So you don't want to use one of the sort of the personal ones, because then privacy is an issue. So I'm just going to use ChatGPT because many people know it, or Copilot, where they have sort of company or enterprise versions, which allow you to access the large language model, but it doesn't learn off of you. All that data that it sort of learns off of you stays within your tenant, or stays within the purview of your, essentially, it doesn't overreach. So someone else cannot get at that data, right? And can't get at whatever it learns from there, right? So if you want to kind of continue with what you're talking about.
And so there are different models that are sort of have that governance in mind. Is one of the reasons why some people have been more willing to go with Copilot, because I think Microsoft had that in mind and had, ChatGPT, even if you buy the pro version, the default is let it train. You have to go in and flip it on until you get to the full enterprise version or the Teams version. Even if you're just paying for your own license, at least that was the case when I set it up about a year and a half or 2 years ago. And Copilot has kind of gone the other direction and has decided to make it sort of by default that it's not shared. In fact, if you have your Copilot app open on your phone, I use Android personally, but same thing on an iPhone, there are two different toggles. There's web versus your office information. And so you have a nice dividing line that tells you this is inside versus this is outside. And so like when you're searching outside, it has no idea what's on my calendar. It doesn't know what's in my email. When you search inside, it, does the kinds of things that you really like a Copilot to do, which is, oh gosh, what does my day look like tomorrow? What should I be preparing? What should I be thinking about? Which is one of the prompts that I use almost every day. Like I look the next day, what should I be preparing for tomorrow? I really ought to do that for a week. If I could just get through the next day, I'm doing well. And it usually says, you look really busy tomorrow. Like, yes, I am very busy tomorrow. But I do feel like that's something that, and I've been talking to more enterprise grade companies that are offering that level of governance sort of by default with multiple models. And that is eventually where we're going to probably land. And it's going to have to be a platform that does it. But right now I'm building kind of a tiered model in my head of, different utilization patterns with different people in my company, and starting to think about roles and how they apply. I have a 60-30-10 model now that I'm playing with 60% being on really a very much more of like just an AI assistant kind of model, data access that gets to specific kinds of data, then 20% of the people who are starting to explore and starting to do some agent activities, and then the 10% of people who are doing wild and wacky things, and they're the ones that I really am excited about. I wish I had time to be wild and wacky like they do, but I unfortunately do not. Uh, yeah, like and I think in the end, that 60% is going to have to be some sort of a tool that does that by default. That's purpose built with the idea of governance in mind and security and all of the different pieces that, my security admin always tells me, AI would never be secure. But then, when you talk about the AI back end of the firewall, he's like, yeah, that's important. We got to apply the machine level speed to the machine level speed that the bad guys are using. Like it's going to be that represents a challenge, but that's that 30% where I'm really struggling. I don't. I'm thinking that we're probably going to stick uh, with Microsoft's Copilot for now, but that's a for now for sure. And the great thing is I can change that once a year when my Office 365 stuff re-ups.
Yeah. So, well, to connect the dots, governance, right? So were those the initial set of governance policies, were they written by you?
It was me along with a member of my legal team and the CFO got together and we talked it through. It was good. And then we looked at what other people who were a little bit ahead of us in other industries were doing, pulled those together and built a policy.
So that's a written policy,
Yeah.
right? Okay. So written policy to start, but then the eventual goal, I don't know if you have this or not, but the eventual goal is to have digital enforcement
That's correct.
of the written policy.
Well,
Why?
well, because we know people. This whole notion of shadow AI, it exists there. We know people are using it. We know people are trying tools that they haven't been authorized to use. Shadow IT is alive and well in the 21st century, and the AI is a big part of that.
So
And
for
firewall systems are starting to incorporate tools for us to identify and filter those kinds of conversations, and we are working on that right now.
So for any listener out there that's listening to this, doesn't understand the term shadow IT, in your own words, what is shadow IT?
Shadow IT are the people who think that IT moves way too slow and is way too boring, and they want to do what they want to do, and they go out and they do it anyway. They've got a credit card, they're just going to charge it, and then we don't know until a month later when the credit card statement comes through that they're using a system.
And why is that a problem?
Because there's no review of governance, there's no review of security, and we basically are putting our data and our systems at risk.
Right.
As well as oftentimes my biggest challenge is I think this is really great for you, but it doesn't scale to the size of the company that we need to scale to. You saying, oh, it's super easy for me. Well, that's great for you individually. But when we try to scale that to the size of the company, it just doesn't work. It breaks down under that strain.
It also creates a nightmare for the IT team or IT department.
To support.
Meaning, if something breaks with it, if something happens with it, who are you supposed to call to solve that problem? Typically, that's the IT department. But if you have shadow IT, you bought it on your own or didn't involve IT in the first place in strategically planning for that. Yeah, this is the too slow part, right?
Yes.
If you didn't plan for it, then all of a sudden you're asking the IT team to solve a problem that they didn't even know existed until you brought it in at that moment. And that problem started month or months ago. IT is not all encompassing and all knowing, right? So I just wanted to kind of go down that bit because the governance side, right, is the data side. But if your data is in multiple platforms that you don't even have control over,
Yes.
then you expose yourself to risk.
Absolutely.
So with shadow IT, don't call the IT department, call Ghostbusters. That's what I got
Yeah,
out of
that's
that,
right.
right?
Call Ghostbusters. That would be great. Although in my job, I was told when I came in that anything with a plug is in my domain. So that includes the coffee maker.
When I worked at a firm before, that was our IT director, had IT director as one card. He has a separate card that said anything that plugs into a wall.
Yes, exactly. That's exactly my job.
Yes, this has been amazing. This has been tons of fun. I feel like we could go for another hour, to be completely honest. But, what we find is listeners don't want to listen that long. So maybe we'll have to do a second episode. But we like to ask this question to all of our guests. So we'll ask it to you. If you could go back 20 years, that's 2005, what advice would you give yourself?
I think that I would give myself the advice that, like, pay attention to the wobbles back and forth. Is that it's going to come back. Like every time, if you're making investments in huge systems that have good power and open APIs and give you flexibility, that's where you should be investing, because eventually people are going to come back to you and say, wow, all these spreadsheets and access databases and everything that I built for myself, I really don't want to do that. I want to just be focused on my job. And like, I've got an enterprise system for you. And I've got tools that I can recreate that bit that you did yourself and made it in a way that's supportable, that's relatively inexpensive for us to produce, and that we have control over.
That's very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
This is an answer from someone that's been in the construction industry, but that's more on the tech side. Very different answer from what we've gotten previously.
From the construction side, like,
buckle
up.
Yeah.
It's going to change. Buckle up. Because even in the 9 years that I've been in the industry, like, the pace of change after the first round of cash that SoftBank put in, like 7, almost 8 years ago, it has gone from 0 to 150. It's awesome, but also crazy.
Wow.
We're going to put all your social and all that kind of stuff in the show notes, as well as the post that you post this week sometime. I'll make sure I throw that in there. But if somebody wanted to get a hold of you, what's the best way for them to do that?
If you can find me on LinkedIn, I am very responsive on LinkedIn, and much more so than on email, honestly. My email is just insane. But LinkedIn is, if you find me there, follow me for pretty consistent conversations about AI, but also complaints about people who are doing it the way that I don't want them to do it.
That's super fair. Before we say our goodbyes, is there anything else you'd like to tell our listeners?
No, I think if you're starting your AI journey, just start slow and start at the edges, because the edges are going to be where you're going to find the best use cases, and people will start adopting better from the edges than they will from the center.
Well said. All right. This has been a ton of fun. I hope everybody's gotten a little bit of AI education today. I know I have. I love Adam's brain and how he sees it, specifically in the construction space. And until next time, adios.
Adios.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Building Scale. To help us reach even more people, please share this episode with a friend, a colleague, or on social media.
Remember, the 3 pillars of scaling a business are people, process, and technology.
And our mission is to help the AEC industry protect itself by making technology easy.
So if you think your company's technology pillar could use some improvement, book a call with us to see how we can help maximize your IT and cybersecurity strategy. Just go to buildingscale.net/help.
And until next time,
Keep building scale.
Scale.